good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, to everybody out there on Facebook. How are you? I'm Susan Bowerman, registered dietitian. I'm coming to you from my kitchen in California. It's a beautiful day here. In fact, it's so warm we've got our windows open, which is nice. Nice that we finally get some warm weather after the cold winter we've had. Thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us and for taking some time out of your day to be here and spend this time with me, where we're going to share a new recipe. So today I'm actually making a full meal, which is a lot to have to do in a half an hour, and we do have a lot to get to. But before we do that, a couple things. Always, first of all, let me know where you're watching from. I always love to see where in the world you are, and I want to be able to give a few shout outs after we watch the video and say hi to some of you out there. And then the other thing is, just remember to leave any questions that you have in the comments section. And it can be about anything. It could be about today's recipe. It could be about anything nutrition related. You know, this is your chance, because you don't often get free access to a registered dietitian, right? And you can just ask a question whenever you want. So be sure and get those questions. We're going to save some time after the video to get to those as well. All right, so today we are making a crispy salt and pepper tofu with broccoli rice and a sweet and sour sauce. And we're going to do all of that in the next 20 minutes or so. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this recipe is because, you know, many of you were asking for vegetarian recipes, number one, and tofu's really healthy, but a lot of people really struggle with the texture. So I'm going to show you a really, really great way to make it crispy without actually having to fry it. And then we're going to make some broccoli rice, which is a lot like cauliflower rice, if you've seen that. And we're going to do a quick sweet and sour sauce, and that's going to feature our active fiber complex tropical twist flavor. Okay, so we've got a lot to get to. Let's get to the video, but don't go away. Be sure you come back, because after the video, I'm going to be here to give you all the nutrition information for our crispy salt and pepper tofu with broccoli, rice, and sweet and sour sauce. All right, okay, let's go to the video. All right. I got very ambitious today, so we can do this. I know we only have about 20 minutes, but we can do this. We have to make three things. We're going to make crispy salt and pepper tofu, so we have to do the tofu. We're going to make broccoli rice, which is really, really quick, and we're going to make a sweet and sour sauce, okay? So first thing we're going to do is we are going to preheat our oven to 400 degrees. That's for us to roast the tofu. And then the other thing that I did to get ready for that is I've got a sheet pan. You do not need one this large, but a sheet pan is lined with parchment paper. That's for the tofu to go on in the oven, and we're only using one block of tofu, so a smaller sheet pan would be totally fine. Parchment is good because otherwise it gets a little bit messy. All right, so for the broccoli rice, maybe you've heard of cauliflower rice. It's been pretty popular for a few years. You take cauliflower and you pulse it in the food processor, or maybe do it in the grater, or chop it up finely with a knife, and then use it as a substitute for rice. So those of you who are watching your refined carbs and you want a replacement for white rice, a lot of people have been using cauliflower rice. And then I saw that people were starting to use other things, including broccoli, and I thought, oh, that's really smart, just for a change, you know, let's try a change of pace. So that's what we're going to do. This is a pound of broccoli, and I've chopped it up kind of just coarsely. One of the reasons I like doing this is it allows you to use the stems, because a lot of times with broccoli, you just cut off the stems and it's such a waste. There's a lot of nutrition in there. If the stems are have some bad parts, you can just take those off with a peeler. But that's it. So a pound of broccoli. I'm going to use a food processor just for speed. If you don't have one, then just do this just do it with a knife if you want to. As I said, it doesn't grate very well, but definitely you can do this with a knife, and it doesn't take that long. I'm going to pulse this because I want this in small pieces, but I don't want it pureed. All right, so we're just going to pulse this really quick. You can already see that's getting a great texture. It really doesn't take long. Okay, that's it. And as I said, you don't want to do it so long that it purees. You just want to chop it up to these nice pieces, because what we're going to do later is we're going to saute this. But oh, isn't that beautiful? I love the smell of broccoli. It just smells so green and fresh and delicious. All right, so that's ready to go. I'm going to set that aside for the moment. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start getting our tofu ready. So this is, this was a 1 pound, I think. When you buy tofu, it either comes in 14 ounce or 16 ounce packages, so somewhere in there. I'm using medium firm tofu. I tried this recipe with a bunch of different types of tofu. Extra firm to me, the tofu got a little too chewy. Medium firm was really just the sweet spot. But one thing we want to do is we want to get rid of some of the water. And you can see it's been sitting on the plate for a few minutes. It's already starting to lose some, which is good because that's going to help it to crisp up. But what we're going to do is we're going to cut this into about 4 pieces. And I'm going to put this over here. This is not hot, so I'm okay. Got a lot going on here today. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a kitchen towel, or if you want to use paper towels, you can. And I'm going to lay the tofu on top of the towel, like that. I should have used a different color towel so you could see what I was doing, but you get the idea. And then we're going to wrap that up, and then I'm going to put this other pan on top and weigh it down with a few cans. And what I'm doing here is I'm just applying a little bit of pressure so that some of that extra water can drain out of the tofu. Now, if I were doing this and we had time to edit and all that, I'd probably let this sit at least for 15 minutes, 30 minutes. You can even do it for 45. If you want to do it longer, you can, but after about 45 minutes, I would put it in the refrigerator. But it's fine. Even a short 15 minutes, you're going to get rid of some of that moisture, which is really, that's the main thing that you want to do. All right, so we're going to set that aside. So broccoli is going, tofu is draining. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make our sweet and sour sauce. And this was really fun to develop this recipe because you know that I like to incorporate Herbalife nutrition products whenever I can. And we have this active fiber complex here that is a tropical twist flavor. It's got kind of a pineapple-y flavor. And I thought, oh, this would be really perfect for this. But if you don't have it and you have the apple flavor, it works perfectly well in this too because we're going for sweet and sour. So because we're going to put some vinegar in it. This is super easy. One of the reasons I wanted to use the fiber, by the way, wasn't just because of the flavor. Obviously, it gives us more fiber in our recipe, which is nice. But the active fiber complex has both soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. So insoluble fiber is kind of like what's in broccoli and vegetables. That's what kind of bulks things up and helps with regularity. And then the soluble fiber is the fiber that tends to soften and dissolve in liquid. So it's going to help to thicken our sauce a little bit, which is sort of nice too. All right, so we're going to mix all this together in the saucepan and then we're going to put it on the heat. So I'm starting with 3 tablespoons of water. And that's just because when I made this, it was really intense, and so I wanted to thin it down a little bit. 4 tablespoons, I'm using light soy sauce, so that's the lower sodium soy sauce. To me, it had plenty of salt. And then I'm using a tablespoon of vinegar. Now you can use any type of vinegar that you want to. I'm using an apple cider vinegar. You can use sherry vinegar, you can use white vinegar, whatever you want. And then we're going to start adding some other things that are going to flavor it up. So here's my 2 scoops of active fiber complex. As I said, I'm using the tropical twist flavor. If you have the apple flavor, it works well because it's just going to add a little bit of sweetness. Even if you have your own flavors, you can. You might want to put a little more sweetener in here, but it should work really well. All right, then we do need a little bit more sweet to contrast with the salt and the acid. So I'm putting in 2 teaspoons of agave syrup. You can use honey, you can use sugar, you can use brown sugar, you can use a sugar substitute if you want to. Let me get a sip of tea here. Always have my tea with me. Keeps me hydrated. It tastes great. All right, and then I'm using a half a teaspoon of ground ginger. If you want to use fresh ginger, of course you can do that. I'm using about 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground white pepper. And that's going to give a little bit of heat, which we like. And then lastly, this is a teaspoon only of cornstarch. Now, I know some of you might say, oh, I don't really want to use that because, you know, it's a starch or it's a carb. But I will tell you that it's a tiny amount of carbohydrate. We're making 3 servings here, and there's only a couple grams of carb there. And it does help for our sauce to thicken up a little bit. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to. Just your sauce will be a little bit thinner. And I'm just going to put this on the burner. And let me see if I can move this out of the way so that you can see what I am doing. Like I said, I got a lot going on here. Let me move this a little bit closer so we can see what's happening. All right, so, excuse me. So this is just going to sit on this burner. It's only going to take a couple minutes to thicken and to boil. And I did this because I thought, well, it'll be nice to have something to kind of drizzle on top of our broccoli, and we're going to have the tofu as well. And that way we've got some flavor. Now, this is optional. I mean, this part is optional. And also, we've got a fair amount of sauce going on here, which is nice too. So you may have a little bit extra. It doesn't really add much in terms of calories. Remember, we've just got water and soy sauce and vinegar and some spices. So it's, you know, it's pretty benign. But it's a nice sauce to have around because you can use it for other things. I mean, I've used it on when I grill fish sometimes, or if I grill chicken, I like to do that. So it is really nice just to have this nice flavorful sauce to be able to add. All right, so this is only going to take a minute. And let me tell you what we're going to do next while we're waiting for this to boil. The last thing we really have to do is to just get the tofu going in the oven, and then we're going to saute the broccoli. And what we're going to do with our tofu as soon as this is thickened is we're going to cut it up into cubes, and we're going to coat it a little bit. Now, if you've ever tried to, you know, make crispy tofu, usually what you have to do is you have to fry it. You have to, you know, put it in quite a bit of oil. And what I was going for was something where we could kind of reduce the amount of oil but still get that crispy texture. And I found this technique, and I kind of played around with it a little bit, and I found that it worked really, really well. And it avoided, you know, not only all the fat that you use when you have to fry, but also just, you know, the amount of extra fat and calories. All right, so this is going to boil. I'm going to just very carefully put that over here while we get the tofu going. And I'll bring that back in a minute so you can see what's going on. And I'm also going to get my other pan ready for our broccoli. All right, so let me get this out of the way. So I'm going to take the weights off of our tofu. So get rid of that. And now I have to bring my cutting board back. I told you I've got a lot going on here. Let me get my cutting board back over here and show you what we're going to do. Now, even though this has only been a few minutes, there's still quite a bit of moisture that's already come out into my towel, which is great. And so now we're going to take our tofu slabs like this, set that aside. And by the way, my sauce is just about done. Isn't it fun when you got a bunch of things going at one time? I love it. And it's starting to smell really good too. All right, so with our tofu, now what we want to do is, now you can cut this up into whatever size squares you want to. I like these about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to cut each of these in half. And then I'm going to just cut them into squares. So as I said, you can make them bigger or smaller. It's up to you, however you want to do it. You're going to have plenty of coating to put on it, so it doesn't really matter. The size of the squares, the only difference might be that if they're smaller, they may not take quite as long. All right, my sauce, by the way, just so you can, I want you to see it, is it's thickened. It's got a great texture. It's all ready to go. So I'm going to set that aside because that's ready. All right. Now, let's get back to our tofu. So what we need to do now is we need to make something to coat this tofu with. And this is kind of the secret to making your crispy tofu. So what I'm using is, it's very small amount of oil. Remember what I said, usually what you have to do is you have to fry this. And so I'm only using a tablespoon of vegetable oil. And I just used a safflower oil. You can use whatever oil you want. That just seemed like the easiest one. Now, I will tell you that the cornstarch in this part of the recipe is not optional, because this combination of it, this is a tablespoon of cornstarch, this combination of a tablespoon of cornstarch and oil, what this is going to do, it's interesting. What cornstarch does is it's going to coat the outside of the tofu, and it's going to prevent the moisture in the tofu from sort of mixing with the oil. And so that's what allows it to get crispy. It's kind of amazing. So this is just, as I said, just a tablespoon of oil and a tablespoon of cornstarch. And then I told you it's salt and pepper. So we're going to add, I'm using a teaspoon of, I'm using kosher salt, which is what I usually use in cooking. And kosher salt is very coarse. So if you use table salt, you're going to use a lot less of it, okay? Because the grains in kosher salt are really big. So I'm using a teaspoon of kosher salt. If you use table salt, you probably only need about a half a teaspoon. And then I'm using a half a teaspoon of black pepper. And then I decided to also add a little garlic. This is a half a teaspoon of garlic powder. You can season this any way you want. It kind of depends on what exactly you want to ultimately do with your tofu, but there's a lot of possibilities with this one. All right, so that's it. And then the tofu cubes now go in here, and I'm going to use a spatula to prepare this, because you want to toss this. Tofu's, you know, it's pretty fragile, and we want to keep our squares looking nice. But you know, that tiny bit of oil, if you think about it, if you were going to fry tofu, how much more oil you'd have to use. But we've only got a tablespoon here, and trust me, it's just enough to make these squares just crispy, but the inside stays nice and tender, which is so cool. All right, so that's it. It's ready to go. So let's get out our baking sheet. And what you want to do, the main thing here is just to make sure that the cubes are really well spread out, because you want to give them room so that they can really roast. Remember, we've got our oven set at 400, which is pretty hot. So if you have a baking sheet that's nice and big like mine, then you can spread it out. And if you can't, then just do the best you can. It'll be fine. All right, so that's it. So this is now going to go in the oven for 30 minutes for the size cubes that I have. And after about 15 minutes, you're going to want to go in and just flip them over just to get them kind of brown on both sides, okay? So I'm going to put this one in the oven, and then we're going to do our broccoli. So let me put that over here, get that going. All right, so the last thing that we have to do is we have to saute our broccoli. So let me again bring this back over here so you can see what I'm doing. Let's do it maybe this way. All right, so with the broccoli, remember all we did was rice it. We didn't put anything on it yet. And I think with this, there's a number of ways you can go. I'm going to keep this really simple. And again, it's really going to depend on what you ultimately want to do with your black broccoli. I figured since we already have our sauce going, that I really don't need a lot of other seasoning on here. But broccoli is really good sauteed with garlic. It's really good if you saute it with like a little garlic and Parmesan or some nutritional yeast. Makes a good flavor as well. The other nice thing about doing this is it really cooks. All you're really trying to do is get it hot. I mean, you don't want to overcook it. You want to keep this beautiful green color. I put about a tablespoon of oil in there. I don't think you need much more. If you don't even want to use the oil, you could probably do this with some broth. I am going to put, again, a little bit of my kosher salt and a little bit of fresh ground pepper. But this is, you don't want to spend a lot of time cooking this, because this is just, as I said, just enough to take that raw taste away and just to make it hot. And so this is basically going to be the base of the bowl that we're making. And we're doing this, as I said, instead of using rice. It's kind of a nice thing to do for a change. You get that nice texture from the broccoli, and obviously it's much more nutritious than what you would get if you were going to use white rice. Brown rice is good. I mean, you know, you've got some vitamins and fiber and so forth in there. But as I said, if you're looking for something that's lower in carbohydrate, this is great. And by the way, this just makes a really good side dish. When I first did this, I was just kind of eating it by itself, and I thought, oh, this is a really fun way to do broccoli, and as I said, a nice way to use up those broccoli stems. All right, so as you can see, it's retained its nice color. Got all the steam coming up. It's very simple, but in my book, this is done, so I'm going to turn that off and move that out of the way so that we can now, carefully, so now we can kind of put our roll together. All right, let me grab the tofu that I just finished baking. Remember, the one we did is still in there, but this is one that I did earlier today. And you can see that it's got a nice brown, crispy coating. It's very chewy, which is good. It's really meaty. The salt and pepper for me is perfect. I mean, it just gives it a lot of flavor. Tofu is not the most flavorful thing by itself. So having that salt and pepper on top is really great. So, to serve this, here's what we're going to do. We are going to start with our broccoli as the base. And as I said, this recipe makes 3 pretty generous servings, or 2 really huge ones if you want to. So the broccoli is going to be the base, and then, you know, if we divide this up into 3s, or 2, then we've got the tofu on top, and our drizzle. So here goes our sauce on top. So good. It's just so flavorful, so delicious. That is it, my friends. And you know, one thing I do like to add, I happen to have in my refrigerator some pickled vegetables, and I like to keep those around sometimes because they're just good for some crunch and some color. So I'm going to put a few of those on top. I've got some pickled onions and some pickled carrots. Oops. And I kind of like that contrast of having something raw and something pickled. So you don't have to do that, but if you just like me and happen to have pickled vegetables around. And then the other thing that's pretty to put on this is to sprinkle it with a little sesame seed. I've got some rice seasoning that I get from the Japanese grocery store that I happen to really love. It's sesame seeds and a little seaweed, and it's really quite delicious. And there you have it. I know you want me to dig in, so I will, and I will tell you how good this is. Mostly I'm going to get just a bite of the broccoli. And it's really, really good. It's still got, it's nice and hot, of course. It's cooked, and but it's still got that nice crunch. And that combination of the broccoli, which, you know, has that, you know, that broccoli flavor that we all love, and then having the tofu and then having the sauce on top of it and then grabbing a pickle. You know, every bite's a little bit different, and every bite is really delicious. So I hope you'll try this. It really, we did all this pretty quickly, which was great. And I know you can do this at home too, so I want to hear about it. But don't go away, because when I tell you all of the nutrition facts on this amazing bowl of crispy salt and pepper tofu with broccoli, rice, and sweet and sour sauce, you will be amazed. So don't go